Throughout history, some deals didn't just move money, they reshaped civilizations, borders, and the balance of power. And while most agreements are forgotten in time, these deals echo across generations. Let's explore the greatest transactions the world has ever seen, the boldest exchanges of land, power, rights, and innovation, from ancient times to modern marvels. We begin in 33 AD, when a Roman governor named Pontius Pilate purchased a small parcel of land outside Jerusalem. What seemed like a minor real estate acquisition became historically significant. It was the site where Jesus was buried. Today, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre stands there, drawing millions of visitors and pilgrims each year. A modest purchase, but one that ended up shaping religious tourism and faith movements globally. Fast forward to 1082, Venice secured an exclusive trading agreement with the Byzantine Empire. In exchange for naval defense, the Venetians were granted duty-free access to the empire's ports. This wasn't just about tax breaks. Venice's economy exploded, becoming one of Europe's most powerful maritime forces. That one deal created an empire of merchants, bankers, and explorers whose influence stretched across the Mediterranean and beyond. In 1494, Spain and Portugal, the two global exploration giants of their time, drew an invisible line down the Atlantic. The Treaty of Tordesillas divided the newly discovered world into two spheres. Spain took the Americas, Portugal claimed Africa, Asia, and Brazil. The agreement, brokered by the Pope, prevented war between the two superpowers and shaped centuries of colonial rule. Nations were born and lost based on this one pen-stroke deal. When the Dutch bought the island of Manhattan in 1626 from the Lenape people for goods worth roughly $24, no one could have imagined it would become the financial heart of the world. Manhattan evolved from a remote trading outpost to New York City, a global hub of finance, culture, and politics. That exchange, misunderstood at the time, marked the start of centuries of displacement, but also triggered a wave of European migration and expansion. In 1703, Peter the Great of Russia signed a deal with the Swedish crown that would end years of war and grant Russia access to the Baltic Sea. He used the opportunity to build St. Petersburg, a window to Europe. With direct sea access, Russia became a European power. It wasn't just about land, it was about trade routes, prestige, and entry into the Western world. By the early 1800s, France held vast lands in North America, but Napoleon, facing wars across Europe, needed cash more than distant colonies. The United States offered $15 million to acquire 828,000 square miles, land that would become 15 future U.S. states. This doubled the size of the U.S. overnight. For France, it funded its war chest. For America, it secured the West and sparked a belief in manifest destiny. But for native populations, it marked the beginning of forced removals and cultural erasure. In 1867, the United States struck another bold move, buying Alaska from Russia for $7.2 million. The deal was mocked as Seward's folly. Many saw it as a frozen wasteland, but beneath Alaska's icy terrain were immense reserves of gold, oil, and minerals. The investment paid for itself many times over. More than that, it expanded U.S. influence into the Pacific and the Arctic, becoming a key piece of its geopolitical strength. A darker transaction occurred in 1884, when European powers gathered in Berlin to carve up the African continent. With little regard for indigenous people, the Berlin Conference saw territories handed out like commodities. Borders were drawn by rulers in faraway capitals. This wasn't just about land, it was about rubber, diamonds, labor, and power. The legacy of that conference still scars Africa today, with tribal conflicts, artificial borders, and economic dependencies that trace back to that moment. In 1917, during World War I, the British and French secretly agreed to divide the Middle East after the fall of the Ottoman Empire. Known as the Sykes-Picot Agreement, it ignored promises made to Arab leaders and sowed seeds of mistrust. Borders were created without cultural or tribal considerations. The modern Middle East, with its decades of conflict and instability, can be traced to this deal forged in secrecy. In the same year, another monumental transaction occurred. The British government issued the Balfour Declaration, promising support for a Jewish homeland in Palestine. This letter, just 67 words long, became a legal and moral foundation for the eventual creation of Israel. It would spark decades of tension between Jewish and Arab populations in the region. A single document shaped the modern geopolitics of the Middle East. Jumping to 1933, a private transaction between the U.S. government and its citizens forever changed the global economy. Under President Franklin Roosevelt, Americans were required to sell their gold to the Federal Reserve at $67 an ounce. Shortly after, the government revalued gold to $35 an ounce, effectively devaluing the dollar. This enabled massive economic recovery programs, but also centralized monetary power like never before. It was one of the most aggressive financial moves in modern history. In 1944, at a quiet resort in New Hampshire, delegates from 44 nations met to rewrite the world's economic order. The Bretton Woods Agreement established the U.S. dollar as the world's reserve currency, tied to gold. The deal created the IMF and World Bank, ushering in decades of U.S.-led global finance. From trade to loans to development, the world's economies would now revolve around the dollar. In 1971, that system was shattered. President Nixon ended the gold standard, meaning the dollar was no longer backed by gold. This unleashed the era of fiat currency, money backed only by trust in government. It changed how inflation, debt, and global banking operated. The U.S. gained flexibility to print money during crises. It was a move of ultimate financial sovereignty. In 1973, OPEC flexed its muscles in response to U.S. support for Israel in the Yom Kippur War. The oil-producing countries imposed an embargo, quadrupling oil prices overnight. Suddenly, energy was a weapon. This transaction of political will altered everything, from car designs to foreign policy. Nations scrambled for energy independence. Oil became not just a commodity, but a strategic asset. One of the most significant tech deals occurred in 1980. Microsoft signed a licensing agreement with IBM to provide the operating system for its personal computers. Microsoft didn't sell it outright. It retained the rights. As IBM PCs took over the market, Microsoft became a software giant, turning Bill Gates into the world's richest man. The structure of the deal, licensing not selling, changed how tech companies built empires. In 1989, the fall of the Berlin Wall marked the collapse of communism in Eastern Europe. In the aftermath, Germany negotiated reunification. East Germany was absorbed into the Federal Republic, a political and economic merger of historic proportions. Billions were poured into redevelopment. A divided people became one nation again, reshaping the European Union and NATO's future. In 2001, China joined the World Trade Organization. The West saw this as a way to integrate China into the global economy and promote liberalization. But the move opened the floodgates. China became the world's manufacturing engine, lifting hundreds of millions out of poverty. At the same time, Western jobs vanished. The ripple effects still divide global economies and politics today. A private acquisition changed the internet in 2006. Google purchased YouTube for $1.65 billion. At the time, many called it risky. Online video hadn't yet exploded, but YouTube transformed media, education, and entertainment. Today, it's a global library, platform, and business ecosystem for millions of creators. In 2019, Saudi Arabia pulled off a massive IPO, listing shares of Aramco, the world's most profitable oil company. It was the largest IPO in history, raising $25.6 billion. It wasn't just about raising money. It was a shift toward economic diversification as the country planned for a future beyond oil. Investors bought into not just a company, but a vision for modern Saudi Arabia. And in 2022, Elon Musk acquired Twitter for $44 billion. The world watched in disbelief as a single man took over one of the most influential social platforms. It was more than a business deal. It sparked debates about free speech, censorship, and digital power. The move reflected how tech CEOs now wield influence rivaling that of presidents and nations. Each of these transactions, whether forged in secret rooms, royal courts, or Silicon Valley boardrooms, carried weight far beyond their original intentions. These weren't just business decisions. They were forks in the road for humanity. The echoes of these deals still shape the borders we live in, the currencies we trust, and the technologies we depend on. And as history moves forward, one truth remains. A single deal, made at the right moment, can shift the course of the world forever. If you found this video insightful, subscribe to Success Loop and turn on notifications. There's more history hidden in the shadows of power, waiting to be uncovered.